He appears for only a moment in the Bible. No birth story, no genealogy, no record of death. Yet Scripture calls his priesthood eternal. His name is Melchizedek. In Genesis, he steps into the story suddenly, blesses Abraham, receives a tithe from him, and then disappears. No explanation, no background, just a quiet exit that leaves a lasting mark. And that alone should make us pause. Because Abraham is not just any man, he is the father of nations, the one through whom the covenant flows. And yet Abraham bows, receives a blessing, and gives honor to someone higher. Scripture is clear on this point. The lesser is blessed by the greater. Centuries later, Psalm 110 echoes his name again. Not as history, but as prophecy. A promise of a priesthood that does not depend on ancestry, ritual, or time. Then the New Testament returns to him once more, explaining why this brief encounter matters more than it seems. Not with imagination, not with legends, but by carefully reading what Scripture says and what it deliberately leaves unsaid. This is not a story built on theories. It is built on text, on context, on what the Bible itself allows us to know. In this video, we will trace every appearance of Melchizedek across Scripture, examine his role in ancient worship, and explain why his name still carries weight today. Because some figures don't need many words to change everything. Before Melchizedek appears, the world of Genesis is already tense, ordered, and dangerous. Genesis 14 opens in a time when city-states ruled the land, not nations as we know them today. Power belonged to kings who controlled trade routes, fertile plains, and tribute systems. If a city submitted, it paid regularly. If it rebelled, force followed. For 12 years, 5 kings in the Jordan Valley lived under the authority of Eastern rulers, powerful kings from regions beyond Canaan. These Eastern kings demanded loyalty and payment. In the 13th year, the system broke. The Valley kings rebelled. What follows is one of the earliest recorded international conflicts in the Bible. The Eastern coalition responds swiftly, moving through territory, defeating cities one after another. This was not random violence. It was punishment. A message to every city watching: rebellion has a cost. The conflict reaches its climax in the Valley of Siddim, near what later becomes the Dead Sea. The local kings are defeated. Cities are looted, people are taken. Among the captives is Lot. Lot is not a soldier. He is Abraham's nephew, living near Sodom, drawn by its resources and protection. When the city falls, Lot falls with it. He is carried away along with everything he owns. The news reaches Abraham quickly, and this is where the story sharpens. Abraham is not a king. He has no army, no fortified city, no political authority. He is a nomadic patriarch, living by promise rather than power. But Genesis tells us something precise. Abraham has 318 trained men born in his household. This detail matters. These are not servants grabbed in desperation. They are trained, disciplined, loyal. Abraham organizes them and moves with speed. He does not wait for alliances. He does not negotiate. He attacks at night. The text describes a surprise strike, followed by pursuit deep into enemy territory, as far as Damascus. Against expectation, Abraham succeeds. The coalition is defeated, the captives are freed, the goods are recovered. It is a real victory, described plainly, without exaggeration. Abraham returns not as a passive survivor, but as a man who has just altered the outcome of a regional conflict. Kings go out to meet him. The king of Sodom comes first, ready to speak terms. And then something unexpected happens. Before Abraham speaks to the king of Sodom, another figure steps forward. Not from the battlefield, not from the coalition of kings, not from Abraham's camp. A priest king emerges, no build-up, no explanation, no introduction. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. It happens at the height of Abraham's victory, at the moment when power, reward, and recognition are all within reach. This timing is not accidental. The audience is already anchored in Abraham's world: war, risk, loyalty, victory. The stakes are clear. The context is set. And now, into this grounded historical moment, Scripture introduces someone who does not fit the pattern. A king who does not demand tribute. A priest who does not come from Abraham's line. A blessing that does not come from conquest. And it is here, right at the turning point of triumph, that Melchizedek appears. Not to fight, not to negotiate, but to bless. And what happens next will quietly reshape how Scripture understands priesthood, authority, and promise itself. Melchizedek enters the story without warning. Genesis does not pause to explain who he is. There is no genealogy, no origin story, no reason given for his presence. The text simply says his name and moves on. This silence is deliberate. In a book where family lines matter deeply, where ancestry defines authority and inheritance, Melchizedek arrives with none of that information attached to him. Scripture introduces him exactly once, records one action, and then lets him disappear. Yet what happens in this brief moment carries weight far beyond its length. He is called the King of Salem. Salem is widely understood as an ancient name for Jerusalem, a place associated with peace and stability long before it becomes Israel's capital. Melchizedek is not presented as a wandering priest or a local elder. He is a reigning king, but he is also something else. He is a priest of God Most High. This title matters. God Most High is not a regional deity. It is the same supreme God Abraham worships. The text makes no distinction between their God. No correction, no conflict. Melchizedek serves the same divine authority, yet he does so outside Abraham's family line. That alone would have been unexpected. Then he brings out bread and wine. Genesis does not explain why. It does not call it a ritual. It does not attach instructions. The action is described, simply and calmly, as if the meaning should be understood. In the ancient world, bread and wine represented provision, fellowship, and peace after conflict. This is not a celebration of victory through force. It is a moment of restoration after violence. Melchizedek does not congratulate Abraham on military skill. He does not praise strategy. He does not negotiate rewards. He blesses him. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. The blessing flows downward, and Scripture makes the direction clear. The one who blesses holds spiritual authority over the one who receives it. Abraham does not resist this. He does not question it. He does not respond with his own blessing in return. He accepts it. Then comes the most surprising act of all. Abraham gives Melchizedek a tenth of everything. This is not demanded. It is not negotiated. It is offered freely. In the ancient world, giving a tithe was a recognition of higher authority. Kings received tribute from those beneath them. Priests received offerings from worshippers. Abraham, fresh from victory, voluntarily places himself in that posture. This is the moment that should not have happened. Abraham is the covenant bearer, the man of promise, the one through whom future blessing will flow. Yet here, he honors someone outside his lineage, someone Scripture refuses to explain. Someone who appears once, speaks a blessing, receives a tithe, and vanishes. And the text offers no defense of this moment, no justification, no clarification, no follow-up. It simply records it and moves on. But Scripture never forgets it, because this brief exchange establishes something profound. It reveals that God's authority is not limited to family lines, national borders, or future institutions. It shows a priesthood already in place, already recognized, already legitimate. And centuries later, when the Bible needs language to explain a different kind of priesthood, one not built on ancestry or ritual, it reaches back to this moment. To a king with no recorded beginning, to a priest with no recorded end, to a blessing that came before the law. Melchizedek appears only once, but nothing about this meeting is accidental. And the rest of Scripture will make sure we understand why. At this point in the story, a quiet question begins to form. If Melchizedek was a priest, who exactly was his God? Genesis uses a specific name, El Elyon. This is often translated as God Most High, but in the ancient world, names carried meaning, not just labels. El was a widely understood term for the supreme creator, not a local or tribal god. Elyon emphasizes authority above all others. Together, the title points to the highest divine authority imaginable, the Creator, the owner of heaven and earth. And here is the important part. When Melchizedek blesses Abraham, Abraham does not correct him. He does not clarify. He does not distance himself. In fact, Abraham immediately repeats the same title when speaking to the king of Sodom. This tells us something essential. Melchizedek and Abraham are speaking about the same God. That challenges a common assumption. Many people grow up thinking that the knowledge of the Creator begins with Israel, that before Abraham the world was entirely disconnected from the true God. But the Bible itself does not support that idea. Abraham is chosen, not because God was unknown, but because God chose to work through him in a specific way. Scripture gives us other examples. Job lives outside Israel, in a land not connected to Abraham's family line. Yet the book opens by describing him as a man who fears God and lives uprightly. His story contains deep theological reflection, long before Israel becomes a nation. There are also figures like Noah, who walks with God before Abraham is even born. And earlier still, Enoch, who is said to have walked with God in a time when no covenant nation existed. These are not random exceptions. They point to a wider truth. The knowledge of the Creator existed beyond one family, one region, or one future law. What makes Israel distinct is not exclusive access to God, but the role they are given in history. Melchizedek fits into this wider picture. He stands as a priest of the Creator in a city that predates Israel. He worships the same God Abraham does, yet he does so without genealogy, without covenant signs, and without recorded instruction. This does not weaken Abraham's calling, it explains it. God is not being discovered for the first time in Genesis. He is revealing himself in stages, choosing vessels, appointing roles, and guiding history toward a larger purpose. And this understanding is not limited to the Bible alone. Archaeology would later uncover ancient inscriptions and texts that reflect belief in a supreme creator figure above regional gods. These findings do not prove Scripture, but they do confirm that belief in a highest divine authority was not unusual in the ancient world. What Scripture does is clarify that belief. Melchizedek does not represent a rival faith. He represents a parallel witness. A reminder that God was already known, already worshipped, and already active beyond the boundaries we often assume. And this makes his role even more important. Because Melchizedek is not an interruption in the story. He is evidence that God's work was always larger than one line, one nation, or one moment. And that realization prepares us for the next question. If Melchizedek's priesthood did not depend on ancestry, if it existed before the law, if it was already recognized as legitimate, why would Scripture return to him again centuries later to explain something entirely new? That answer takes us forward, far beyond Genesis, into the heart of the Bible's unfolding design. For a long time, the religious world of ancient Canaan was poorly understood. Much of what people assumed came from later periods when corruption and violence had already taken root. But in the early 20th century, archaeology uncovered something unexpected. In the late 1920s, excavations at a site called Ras Shamra on the Mediterranean coast of modern-day Syria revealed the ruins of the ancient city of Ugarit. What archaeologists found there would quietly reshape how scholars understood early Canaanite belief. Thousands of clay tablets were recovered. These tablets were written in a previously unknown alphabetic script, now called Ugaritic. When scholars began translating them, they discovered detailed religious texts, myths, prayers, and records describing how the people of Canaan understood the divine world. And at the top of that world was a figure named El. El was described as the supreme creator, the father of humanity, the source of authority above all other gods. He was portrayed as ancient, wise, and removed from daily conflict. This is important. El was not a storm god. He was not a warrior. He was not driven by appetite or violence. He was understood as the highest authority. Over time, however, the tablets reveal a shift. As generations passed, worship moved away from El and toward a younger, more aggressive figure, Baal. Baal was associated with storms, fertility, power, and immediate results. He was visible, dramatic, and active in mythic conflict. El, meanwhile, became distant, still acknowledged, still named, but no longer central. This transition marks a religious degeneration, not the loss of belief but the distortion of it. The supreme creator fades into the background, while a force-driven deity takes center stage. This matters for understanding Melchizedek. Melchizedek is called a priest of El Elyon, the Most High God, not Baal, not a storm deity, not a localized power tied to fertility or warfare. He serves the Creator. And historically, this places him early, before Baal worship dominated the region, before El became a remote figure, before religion shifted towards spectacle and control. Melchizedek fits into a period when belief in a supreme creator still existed, before it was overshadowed by gods that promised immediate power and visible reward. This alignment is striking. Genesis presents Melchizedek as a priest of the Most High God in a city that predates Israel. Archaeology reveals that early Canaanite belief also recognized a supreme creator named El before later religious decline. These are not competing stories, they are overlapping ones. The Bible's timeline and archaeology suddenly align. What Scripture records in a few quiet verses, archaeology supports with physical evidence uncovered thousands of years later. Not by proving the Bible, but by confirming the world it describes. Melchizedek does not emerge from a corrupted system, he stands before it. A priest of the Creator in a time when such worship still existed. A reminder that truth did not vanish overnight, it was slowly replaced. And that makes Melchizedek even more significant. He represents a faithful priesthood before distortion set in. A model untouched by later excess, ritual corruption, or political religion, which raises a deeper question. If Melchizedek represents a pure form of priesthood before decline, why does Scripture later use him as the pattern for something new? To answer that, we must leave archaeology behind and move forward in time, into the Psalms, and then into the New Testament, where Melchizedek's name appears again, carrying meaning far beyond his single appearance in Genesis. And this time, Scripture will explain exactly why he was never forgotten. After his brief appearance, Melchizedek vanishes. There is no farewell, no summary of his life, no record of children, successors, or death. And for a figure who plays such a decisive role, this absence feels intentional. To understand why, we need to notice what Genesis normally does. The book of Genesis is deeply concerned with genealogy. Names matter, fathers and sons are traced carefully. Authority, inheritance, and covenant all move through family lines. Even minor figures are often placed within a lineage. But Melchizedek stands outside this pattern. Scripture does not tell us who his father was. It does not name his mother. It does not explain how he became priest or king. It does not describe the end of his life. This is not an oversight. Genesis is precise when it wants to be. The silence surrounding Melchizedek is not a gap in knowledge. It is part of the message. The Bible is not only teaching through what it records, it is also teaching through what it withholds. By presenting Melchizedek without ancestry, Scripture separates his priesthood from lineage. His authority does not depend on who came before him or who will come after him. It stands on recognition, not inheritance. This does not mean Melchizedek was immortal. The Bible never claims that. He lived, he served, he died. But Scripture chooses not to record those details. Why? Because the focus is not on the man. It is on the kind of priesthood he represents. One that does not rise or fall based on genealogy. One that does not require succession to remain valid. The silence allows Melchizedek to function as a pattern rather than a personality. If Genesis had included his birth and death, his priesthood would be anchored in time. It would be closed, finished, limited to one generation. Instead, Scripture presents him without edges. Not eternal in reality, but timeless in how he is portrayed. This literary choice is powerful. It allows later writers to point back to Melchizedek as an example of a priesthood that exists apart from the structures Israel would later know, before the law, before the temple, before the sons of Levi. And at the time Genesis was written, nothing more needed to be said. The silence was enough. But centuries pass. Israel becomes a nation. The law is established. The priesthood is formalized through ancestry. And in the midst of this structured system, one king begins to read the Scriptures more closely. David. David notices what Genesis does not say. He notices the priest with no genealogy. The king who blesses Abraham. The priesthood that existed before the law and outside tribal boundaries. And in a single line of poetry, David brings Melchizedek back into the story, not as history, but as prophecy. And with that moment, the silence surrounding Melchizedek becomes louder than ever. Because now the question is no longer why Genesis said so little. The question is why Scripture decided to speak again. Centuries after Genesis, Melchizedek's name surfaces again. Not in a historical record, not in a genealogy, but in a psalm. Psalm 110 opens with authority and confidence. It speaks of a ruler invited to sit at God's right hand, a king whose reign is established by divine declaration rather than human lineage. This is the first movement of the psalm. A king is appointed. His authority is unquestioned. His enemies are placed beneath his rule. For ancient Israel, this language is familiar. Israel understands kingship. It understands rule, throne, and victory. But then the psalm shifts. The second movement begins with an oath. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. This is where everything changes. In Israel, kings and priests are separate by design. Kings come from the tribe of Judah. Priests come from the tribe of Levi. The separation is strict. When individuals attempt to cross it, consequences follow. Yet Psalm 110 unites both roles in one person. One individual is declared king, the same individual is sworn in as priest, not temporarily, not symbolically, but forever. And the reference point is not Aaron, not Levi, not the temple system. It is Melchizedek. This choice is deliberate. Melchizedek represents a priesthood that predates the law, a priesthood not tied to ancestry, sacrifice schedules, or temple service, a priesthood recognized by Abraham himself. By invoking Melchizedek, the psalm points to a form of authority older than Israel's institutions and broader than its boundaries. This is revolutionary. Israel had kings, Israel had priests, but never this. Never one person holding both offices with divine approval. Never a priesthood established by oath rather than birth. Never a role defined as lasting without reference to succession. The psalm does not explain how this will happen. It does not name the individual. It simply declares that it will. And it grounds that declaration in a pattern already present in Scripture. Melchizedek becomes the bridge, a king who was also a priest whose authority was recognized without genealogy, a figure whose brief appearance now anchors a future promise. Psalm 110 does not add details to Melchizedek's life. It does not need to. It uses the pattern Genesis already established and applies it forward. What was once a quiet moment after a battle now becomes a framework for understanding leadership, mediation, and divine authority. And this psalm will not remain a poetic mystery. Later Scripture will return to it, line by line, to explain how this promise is fulfilled, not by reshaping Melchizedek, but by revealing why his pattern was preserved in silence. Because once kingship and priesthood are joined by divine oath, the entire structure of authority changes. And the final explanation will come from a place no one expected, through careful reasoning, not speculation, and through the same scriptures that introduced Melchizedek in the first place. Hebrews handles Melchizedek with precision. It doesn't retell his life, it shows how Scripture makes meaning from what it says and what it leaves unsaid. Hebrews adds no new facts. It reads Genesis as written and uses typology, real people, real history presented in a way that points beyond them. So when Hebrews says he is without father or mother, it's not biology, it's text. Genesis gives no genealogy, no recorded beginning, and no listed successor. In a Bible where lineage usually validates priesthood, that silence matters. The point is this: as Scripture presents him, Melchizedek's priesthood isn't anchored to ancestry and isn't shown ending through succession. That makes him a fitting pattern for a priesthood that doesn't depend on the law. Early readers missed this. Some treated the lack of origins and end as proof he was divine. Others said he was Christ appearing before the incarnation. Hebrews never says that, and the argument actually requires the opposite. Hebrews compares Melchizedek to Christ. It doesn't merge them. A pattern must be distinct from its fulfillment. Melchizedek is the historical priest-king. Christ is the greater reality the pattern points to. Genesis restraint is the engine of the whole passage. The mystery isn't there to invite speculation, it's there to teach. Hebrews doesn't remove the mystery, it explains why it's there. Once you see that, the passage stops being strange and starts being sharp. Scripture showed only what the later argument needed, nothing more. And the personal implication is hard to miss. If Christ's priesthood is not inherited, not fragile, and not temporary, then your access to God is not fragile either. With the pattern clarified, Hebrews moves from comparison to conclusion. And that leads to the final question. Why does Melchizedek still matter, not only in doctrine, but in your life? By the end of this journey, one thing becomes clear. Melchizedek was never meant to be a puzzle solved by imagination. He was meant to be a pattern preserved by Scripture. What do we truly know? We know he was a historical king and priest. We know he served the Most High God, the creator of heaven and earth. We know he blessed Abraham, and Abraham accepted that blessing. We know his priesthood existed before the law, before Israel, and outside genealogy. And we know Scripture chose to record him briefly, carefully, and deliberately. Nothing about Melchizedek is accidental. He is not a footnote. He is not an interruption. He is foundational. Through him, Scripture shows that God's work did not begin with institutions. It began with purpose. Long before Israel was formed, before laws were written, before temples were built, God was already revealing the kind of authority he would establish, one rooted in calling rather than lineage, in oath rather than inheritance. Melchizedek stands at the intersection of history and meaning. His quiet appearance prepares the way for later revelation without explaining it too soon. His silence makes space for fulfillment rather than forcing understanding before its time. And that is why he still matters. Not because he appears often, but because he appears early. Not because we know everything about him, but because Scripture tells us exactly what we need. His story reminds us that some of the most important truths in the Bible are not shouted. They are placed carefully, waiting for the right moment to be understood. And that leaves us with one final thought. If God was already preparing this pattern so early, if meaning was being shaped through silence as much as through speech, what else might we be missing in the quiet parts of Scripture?